Hi guys and welcome back. In this video we're going to talk about lists. Lists allow us to store multiple values in a single variable. For example, imagine you've got a program that contains the names of your friends. You could start off with something like this. But of course, you can imagine that as your program grows, this becomes less and less feasible. You have to keep adding variables, and not only that, but working with these variables becomes increasingly difficult. For example, if you wanted to print out who your friends are, you would have to say, print friend 1, and then you have to print friend 2, and then friend 3, and if you add more, you would have to add more print statements. And that means that as your code grows, it grows more and more and more exponentially. And that means that this code is not going to be very easy to work with. It's much better if we create a list. Like this. Now we've got a single variable, friends, and that name describes very well what it contains, which is the names of our friends. To create a list, we use square brackets, and inside the list, we put the different values separated by commas. So what we've got here is a list of 3 strings. The first one is Rolf, the second one is Bob, and the third one's Anne. If we want to access the value of a single friend, you would do friends, and then using square brackets again, you would put 0, for example. And what this does is it accesses the first element of the list. Notice that in computing, we start counting at 0, so element 0 is the first element 1 is the second element, and so on. So if we run this, you'll see that Rolf gets printed out because that's the first element there. Similarly, if we print friends 1, you'll see Bob printed out. Notice that you can put anything you want inside a list, so you could put 2 in there if you wanted to, but this is highly discouraged. Generally, you want to keep data inside a list homogeneous, and what this means is you want to keep it all related and all the same. For example, here if you've got a list called friends, you probably want to keep your friends in that list. If you have a list called furniture, you would want to keep strings describing the furniture in that list. If you see something like this out there in some code that you read somewhere else, it probably means that the programmer in question started writing some code about furniture and then decided to write about friends instead. And generally when you do this, you want to make sure that your variables do change. While you can do this, it's generally discouraged because the data inside the list is no longer described by the variable name. So this can be a bit confusing. If you see a variable called friends, what's the 2? Does that mean you have 2 friends? Is it something else? Maybe one of your friends is called 2? So keep the data inside your lists homogeneous, and that's going to make your life much easier as you program more. Of course, if you did want to get the amount of elements in the list, say 2, you don't have to put the 2 inside the list. You can just print the len of friends. So if you do len and then inside the brackets you put the list, this is going to give you the length of the list or the size of it. So if we run this, you'll get 2 out because that's the number of elements in this list, Rolf and Anne. You can put anything you want inside a list, so it doesn't have to be strings or numbers. You can put other lists if you want. For example, let's create a list of friends and their ages. So here this outer list, denoted by these square brackets outside of every other element, has 3 lists inside it. This one, that one, and this one. Each of those lists has 2 elements inside it. Those 2 in this list, Bob and 30 in this list, and Anne and 27 in the final list. If you wanted to access a specific element, for example, Rolf, all you have to do is access the first element of the outer list, and that is friends 0, and then the first element of the inner list. So when you do friends 0, what you're getting back is this list here. What happens in Python is that this is replaced essentially by this list. So now if you want to access the first element of this list, you just put another 0 inside square brackets at the end. So this here is this list, and all of this is Rolf. Similarly, if you wanted to access Bob's age, for example, you could do friends1, 1. When you have a long list, such as this one, it's usually good form to split it out into multiple lines, like this. The square brackets in their own lines, and then with some spacing in front, although it is not required but it is generally used, you can put each of the sublists in there. Indeed, if it's a list of strings, say, you can also put each string in their own line, just so it's a bit easier to read. This clearly shows that you've got a long list, and this is each element in the list, and you can see they're comma separated at the end. Do pay close attention when you are writing lists that you have the commas in the right place. Here we've got a comma inside this inner list, which means it's got two elements, and then we've got a comma afterwards, which separates this element from other elements in the outer list. Just something to pay close attention to. Let's go back to our friends list with just strings and look at how to add to one of these. To add to a list, all you have to do is type the list name, .append. And what that's going to do is it's going to add a name, or indeed add anything, to the list at the end. That's what append means. So if we print friends now, you'll see that we've got 4 elements inside the friends list. Similarly, you can remove from a list if you want by doing friends.remove and then say Bob. Now if we print this, you'll see that it's only got 2 elements, Rolf and Anne. Something to remember is that if you have a list of lists, for example, and you want to remove one of these sublists, you've got to say friends.remove and then everything you want to remove. So that's Anne, say 27. And what this means is you're going to remove from the friends list, which is all of this, the value of this list. So this entire list is going to go away. If you just do Anne, Python is going to say Anne doesn't exist in this list because this list contains 3 things. This, that, and that. And Anne is not one of those things. What is one of those things, though, is this entire list, Anne with 27 in it. So if we print friends now, you'll see that that entirely disappears, and you're left with just the 2 other lists inside your friends list. Hopefully this makes sense. Lists are a very useful data structure, and they're everywhere in Python, and you're going to be using them a lot throughout your programming. If you're not sure when you would want to use a list versus a string, don't worry too much about it. Over the coming videos, we're going to be getting more experience with using lists, as well as some other data structures that we'll be looking at, and you will learn more about when and how to use them. So with that said, I'll see you in the next video.